Failure is not the opposite of success, it's a part of success.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today's show is also brought to you in part by Hotels.com and by Grip 6 Belts. Today we are looking at the Milwaukee Bucks, their 2018-19 season in review. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Normally at this point, I've been going in descending or ascending order of NBA records. So the Warriors would be coming up for this show and then the Raptors. But because they're still participating in the finals, I'm going to leave those to the last two teams. We'll probably end up recording those ones before the finals actually finish, because this is more of a regular season review, because that's what counts for fantasy basketball. But because they're still playing, and we might get some more stuff still happening, we'll leave those two to the last two teams that we look at in the season review. This is, of course, the team, the Milwaukee Bucks. For this show, they finished with the best record in the NBA, 60-22, a massive jump forward with a new coach, Mike Budenholzer. They were second in pace, first in defense, fourth in offense. Smashed the Pistons, smashed the Celtics, and then lost in 6 games to the Raptors after being 2-0 up. Pretty disappointing result there in the end, but it was a huge step forward for Milwaukee this season. I thought they had a legitimate chance of beating the Golden State Warriors in the finals. That wasn't to be, because they couldn't beat the Toronto Raptors, but still a massive improvement with this team. Second in the NBA in 3-point attempts, number 1 in 2-point percentage. Giannis helps that. The best rebounding team in the NBA, the second best shot blocking team in the NBA. In terms of turnovers, they're only the third best in terms of steals allowed, which turnovers off live balls, steals, is more important than dead ball turnovers, so really good in limiting that. They had a little bit of luck in terms of the opponents had the worst free throw percentage against them throughout the course of the season, so that helps them a little bit in that area, but they really modernized what they did. Third in the NBA in 3-point attempt rate. Brook Lopez was a key addition, but just getting him to just bomb threes every game, and really Budenholzer working this offense and defense to its best of its ability. It helps when you don't have two of the worst head coaches running things in Jason Kidd and Joe Prunty, but Budenholzer modernized things. Disappointing end to the season for this squad, though, with how they went out in the playoffs. Let's have a look at how their season pans out for this coming year. They only have one draft pick. It's pick 30, and then next season they do have their pick going to Phoenix if it's protected 1 to 7. So you would imagine that first round pick that's part of the Eric Bledsoe deal does end up going to Phoenix next season. It's pretty hard to envisage the Bucks having one of the worst 7 records in the NBA, so they'll lose that first round pick. But only the 30th pick upcoming for this season, but a ton of decisions they have to make in free agency. They can get to $20.5 million in max cap space, but that would require them really renouncing a ton of holds. Let's have a look how that all works. First of all, let's look at George Hill, who is on the books for $18 million, but only $1 million of that is guaranteed. You'd have to think that in order to not go too far into the tax and re-sign their other key players, although Hill was a really key part in the playoffs, that he will likely be waived to save some of that cash. They have Chris Middleton, who has a $13 million player option that there is no chance he will pick up. He will decline that and become an unrestricted guy and get a max contract somewhere. Most likely Milwaukee. Nikola Mirotic is an unrestricted free agent. He was, I think, useful at times, had some issues in the playoffs, but was obviously a key piece in his team that wants to push for a championship, and they're going to want to bring him back. But most importantly, they're going to want to bring Brook Lopez back, who they signed at $3.4 million last season, a 1-year deal. They don't have bird rights in him, so that is going to be a really intriguing discussion. Will Lopez want to come back? He played excellently. They love that, but will another team's big offer to Lopez be enough to drag him away? They also have the restricted free agency of Malcolm Brogdon. Now, he's got a really small cap hold, just $3 million cap hold because of how low his salary was. He's going to be getting, I would say, deals in the $20 million range just for how good he can be. Secondary ball handler, defender, hit threes, a key part of this team. Wasn't quite right in the playoffs after coming back from that injury, and I think that's part of the reason that they did struggle, just that issue with him not being quite right. Pau Gasol and Tim Frazier are also unrestricted guys. Gasol barely played. You have to think that his time in the NBA is pretty limited at this point, while Tim Frazier's a guy that you always think is going to be able to provide value and never does. And then Sterling Brown and Paddy Connaughton, they have non-guarantees on their contracts, fully non-guaranteed at $1.6 and $1.7 million. And the Bucks, unless there's some sort of weird free agency move they're looking to pull, they'll be bringing those guys back on those cheap deals as rotation pieces. But obviously the key decisions here are going to be Middleton, then Lopez, Brogdon, and Mirotic. Really, really key decisions in this offseason. It's going to probably push them into the tax, re-signing these guys, especially if they're giving more to Lopez and more to Middleton, and the order of operations with these guys in terms of going over the cap, which they can do for Brogdon and Middleton. Lopez, it will be harder to do because of the non-bird rights issues that they do have with him. So that's going to be, the Lopez decision is probably going to be the key one. And of course, if Middleton wants to come back, Eric Bledsoe was slated to be an unrestricted free agent as well, but he signed that extension that will pay him the next 3 years non-guaranteed at $15, $17, and $18 million with a non-guarantee of 19 in the fourth year, which is the 2022-2023 season. So that's how their off-season shapes up. If this is your off-season for podcasts, make sure you are download. That was a terrible segue. Download the Himalaya podcast app. It is free. It is easy to use, and they have every single podcast you already love, and new ones that you're searching for. They have curated playlists made by their expert podcast tastemakers. You can find themed collections of shows. Give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment on individual episodes. Download the Himalaya podcast app on the App Store or the Google Play Store, and don't forget to follow this show, Locked On Fantasy Basketball, once you're there. Let's look now at these players. Of course, we have to start with Giannis Antetokounmpo, the number 3 ranked player overall in fantasy basketball. Probably would have given Harden a shake for the number 1 spot had that free throw percentage not been as poor as it was. But an excellent season from Giannis. 33 minutes a game, 27.7 points, 0.7 threes. The 12.5 rebounds is massive. Almost 6 assists, 1.3 steals, and 1.5 blocks on 58 and 73% from the line. He shot just 26% from 3, but that's a little bit misleading because at the start of the season, he was hitting absolutely nothing from 3, and then that started to improve as the season went on. He became more confident taking those threes. It also happened with his free throw percentage as well. That tended to improve as the season went on, but this was by far a career high in rebounding numbers for Giannis. In scoring, he topped his career high from last season. His assists were up as well. He's not able to get the same level of defensive stats that he got a couple of years ago, but they still rebounded, and he became more efficient overall as well. A true shooting of 63%, despite posting his worst free throw percentage since his rookie season, is an impressive feat. And that comes on that fact that the 2-pointers just took an unbelievable leap. Now, in the preseason, there were a lot of people that were taking Giannis at number 1 in fantasy drafts, and I was way off that. I had no interest in that whatsoever. One of the main reasons that me and Kyle spoke about while we had Giannis down, I think I had him at 5 in my projections overall, not too far off, he finished number 3, was because Budenholzer wasn't going to play him 37 minutes a night. And we were bang on, absolutely 100% correct with that. We said 33, 34 minutes, and that's what he played. The problem we didn't envisage happening is him shooting 7% better from 2-point land, taking his rebounds up an additional 25% from 10 to 12.5, improving his assist numbers from 4.8 to 5.7. We didn't see all those things happening, which I think fair enough. Like, no, who's seeing someone take a 7% increase in 2-point percentage? That's a huge leap. 62% in 2-point percentage is such a big jump, and that's what enabled him to push up to be that 3rd ranked player. So he did that all in 4 fewer minutes, which is really an amazing result for Giannis this season. Really, really great stuff to see what he was able to do. Can he get better than this? Well, yeah, he can. Actually, but back to what we're talking about with his shooting percentages. 6% from 3 in October, 14 in November, 22 in December, but then we go 31, 40, 27, and 40 through January, February, March, and April. That's impressive. The last 4 months in free throws, 73, 78, 76, 75. So, when we look at what Giannis did this season, all right, that's 71 free throw. Can that go back to 76? Can the 3-pointers go to 32? And if both of those things do, then he's not the 3rd ranked player anymore. He's the 2nd and maybe the 1st. But is that 62% shooting going to stick from 2-point land in general? 66% from the rim is huge from him. And again, looking at it, his mid-range twos, he shot 21%. So that is not that is not fueling this high number. It's just him getting to the rim and him finishing over everybody. And anyone who's watched Gianni play doesn't go, yeah, he probably can't do that again, because he can. So can he maintain at least a 60% 2-point percentage, 62%, increase the threes, increase the free throws, maintain the rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks? Yes. I think if Brook Lopez leaves, maybe the rebounds drop. That might seem counterintuitive, but Lopez is one of the best team rebounders and box-out guys in the entire NBA, along with his brother. And players' rebounding numbers generally go up when they play with Brook Lopez. So if Lopez is there, does Gianni go from 12.5? If Lopez goes from 12.5 to 11, 10.5? I think that's a distinct possibility as well. But there is significant room still for improvement that we saw happen over those last 3 months in the season for Antetokounmpo. Plus 7.64 PIPM, wins added massive 14.49, a plus 8.9, by far the team best. We know how good he is, and we're not even at the peak of his power. Still only 24 years of age, won't turn 25 until about Christmas time. Absolutely massive stuff from Gianni, and you all love him, and that's me just rambling on about him for probably way too long. Let's go on to the next player, and that is Eric Bledsoe, the 45th ranked player overall. 29 minutes a game only is disappointing. I thought he'd be playing 32-33. And that's why I had him as like a fringe second round guy. Didn't live up to that, no doubt. I thought that 42 ADP was a real steal. I didn't expect him to play as few minutes as he did. 16 points, 4.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists with 1.5 steals, 48 and 75 with 33% from three. But again, I talk about it all the time. That 3-point percentage, this is a guy that was a 34% guy each of the last 2 years. When it drops down that low, it's a 3-category influencer. And we saw this with Bledsoe, that dropped off. The other thing that dropped off was his steal rate. His steal numbers are really weird. The last 4 years, 2 steals, 1.4, 2 steals, 1.4. If he goes back to 2 steals next year and everything else remains the same and plays an extra 2 minutes a game, then he's back into the top 30 discussion, top 25 discussion. So the way he finished, he's going to be a 4th or 5th round guy again in drafts. I'll be all over him because if 2 extra minutes, steal rate bump back up, a little bit more consistency with the shooting, and you're back in that top 30. Really, really easily. It's very, very easy to see what Bledsoe can do there. It's really dependent on the steal rate, but he can do it. He can get more steals. That can bump back up. And if the shooting becomes a little bit more consistent and he just plays those extra couple of minutes, which may or may not happen, depends how Budenholzer wants to run it, but he can still do it. I wouldn't think he plays less minutes next season or fewer minutes. So Davos would have an issue with that.
I'm not sure I get a vote, but
I think he can get better than this. He was, we have criticisms of him in the playoffs. He had some moments, but we're talking fantasy is a regular season thing. He was second on this team in PIPM. I thought he was pretty stiff to miss out on at least All-Star and All-NBA consideration. Got the All-Defensive team. Wasn't sure he should have been quite there, but he's a really good defender. On-off stuff was positive, plus 6.8, second best on the team. I think people would be a little bit surprised to see him in that area. He is still really, really good, and a key fantasy contributor is Eric Bledsoe. Make sure you are a key contributor to your family's holidays by going to Hotels.com. Don't hate like your friends' trips. Book your own with Hotels.com. Get rewarded basically everywhere. Hotels.com. Be there, do that, get rewarded, and get yourself and your family a Grip 6 belt. Ultra lightweight belts with no holes, no flap. A great Father's Day gift fits flat against you. Men's, women's, kids belts. Go to grip6.com/lock for your special offer. Let's go on to the next guy, and that is the one and only Brook Lopez, completely misused by the Lakers last season. Only 23 minutes a night is horrendous use by Luke Walton, and that made him the 118th ranked player. I was all about drafting Lopez at the place that he was available. Ended up, his ADP came into 83. It started off in about the 120s, which is nonsense, and he clearly smashed through that. I didn't think he'd be this good. 55th ranked player overall, 29 minutes, 12.5 points, 5 boards. We know the discrepancies there, but 2.3 threes and 2.2 blocks, that is unheard of, and it's unheard of because it literally has never happened before. 45 and 84, including 37% from 3. He took a massive 6.3 at 3-point attempts per game. The second highest number on this team. The only guy who took more threes per game, and that's split over multiple teams, is Nikola Mirotic, who took 6.9 shots per game. Lopez really ramping it up. A huge threes guy, a huge blocks guy, solid with his free throws. Will he ever go back to being that top 25 guy he was in Brooklyn, where he was a 20-point per game guy? No, but that was also when he was shooting no threes and had a usage of 27. He had a usage of 17% this season and was still a top 60 guy with those blocks and threes combination. This is a guy that is probably a little older than you think, 31 years of age. But he can still maintain 28, 29 minutes a night and do this again next season. The team he goes to is going to be really interesting. If he's back in Milwaukee, will another team play him 30 minutes? Could he push into the top 40, top 30 for one season? Absolutely. But this offense suited him perfectly. But he can open up any offense, really. And that's why it was always ridiculous the way the Lakers played him. The confidence also took a massive hit in LA. That's why his free throws were at 70%. And this year, in a good system with a team that knows how to use him, 84%. There is so much about free throws to do with your mental state and your confidence, and that obviously impacted Lopez throughout the course of this season. Plus 4.09 PIPM, a massive defensive component, plus 2.84 there as well. On off at plus 6.2, third best on the team. What more do I need to say about Lopez? A massive fantasy steal, a huge season, and I expect another pretty big year from him coming up. I don't think many people would have expected the fourth best fantasy player on this team to be Chris Middleton. In fact, ADP didn't suggest that because he had an ADP of 29, ended up 58th, only played 31 minutes a night. That's a big part of it because the year before he played 36 and a half under the nonsense that was Jason Kidd. 18 points, 6 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 1 steal, 44 and 84%, including 38% from 3. So why did he fall off? Well, the 5 fewer minutes per game didn't help. The drop in steal rate didn't help. He had a drop in efficiency, which of course didn't help as well. Everything else was pretty static for Middleton, but that's why he fell off. So can that steal rate come back up? I think that's a possibility. Can the efficiency jump back up? He was at 52% on twos the year before. Can that jump itself back up as well? I think that's a possibility that he can get to that level. Still hit 82%, so still hit 44% of his mid-range twos. So there is some concern there that maybe that's not going to be able to jump up as high as it was the year before. But he's pretty solid in that 40 to 60 type of zone. If he's back on this team with all these options, it's really hard to see him changing too much from here. He's going to have an ADP, I reckon, in the 50s. He goes to another team. He could very comfortably be a second-round guy, a 22-point-per-game scorer with 6 boards and 5 assists with 1.6 steals. I think he could do that on another team. So his free agency is going to impact his value significantly. Back in Milwaukee, I think he can have a marginally better season, but not crazily. And those 31 minutes a game, with how good this team is, it's going to be harder to see him actually push above that because Budenholzer has no need to do that during the regular season with how good this squad actually is. 2.48 PIPM. It means that he was behind Bledsoe, Lopez, and Yanni in that number. Still contributed a lot, obviously. Plus 3.4 on off was actually the worst amongst the 5 regular starters, which is curious to see. A little bit overrated defensively at this point, but obviously not a negative in that area. And still a really solid and strong fantasy contributor. The next guy we talk about is Nikola Mirotic, 72nd ranked player overall, 27 minutes a night. Most of this contribution came as a member of the Pelicans. Had some injuries to his ankle, which limited him to 46 games. 15 and 7 with 2.5 threes, 0.7 steals, 0.7 blocks, 44 and 85. You know I like this guy. You know he is an accomplished player. His role in Milwaukee, though, is really going to have an impact on what his value is. And for the last 21 games of the season, he was outside the top 200, and most of that was in Milwaukee. Now, a lot of that was the fact that the shots just wouldn't fall in Milwaukee, but also the minutes are down. He's not going to be a 27-minute-a-night guy if he does return to the Bucks. He's going to be 22, 23, and that's probably going to take him out of standard league discussions. Now, if he goes to another team, and say he goes to the Phoenix Suns and starts at power forward and plays 30 minutes a night, he's a top 50 guy, no debate. Because he gets steals, he can get blocks, he can pass, he can take the ball off. He's not a spot-up shooter. People think, he's just this white guy spot-up shooter. He's not. He can do plenty with the ball. Put him in a situation where he can do that, and we'll see the numbers come. And we saw that as a member of the Pelicans. Just as the Bucks, it's a bad fit. And I think a bad fit from a fantasy point of view, great for that team and great for their overall success. But overall, he's not going to be able to maintain a ranking of 70, which is where he ended this season. As a member of the Bucks, he was a plus 0.44 PIPM, so still really strong in those 320 minutes. A plus 1.7 on off, even with the shots not falling. So he's going to be someone to pay attention to. His free agency, much like Middleton's and Lopez's, it's going to be really determinable. I don't know what the right word is. It's all going to be determined by where he ends up going and what role he ends up finding himself in. Their 6th top 100 guy, 6th, was Malcolm Brogdon. Brogo had an ADP of 115, but finished the season as a 77th ranked player. Had that issue at the end of the year, limiting him to 64 games, 29 minutes, 15.5 points with 4.5 boards and 3 assists, 0.7 steals, 51 and 93. That's where his value came. His best two categories were both of his percentages, making him a significantly better rotisserie player than head-to-head player, and of course significantly better than in those leagues than in points leagues as well. He took his scoring up by playing fewer minutes, which is really impressive, and he did that by upping his usage and upping his true shooting from 58 to 61. Everything else stayed about the same, apart from rebounds, which he did improve in that rebounding area, but really his value comes from the efficiency, and it's not fluky. Last year he shot 49 and 88, this year he shot 50 and 91. He went through a stretch where he just didn't miss a free throw for games and months in a row. Here, that stretch here, from the 21st of November all the way through to the 13th of January when he didn't miss a free throw. Like, that is a crazy number. And he gets to the line a not insignificant amount, 2.5 attempts per game. So that's an influence. But both his best categories are easily his percentages, making him the ranking look really, really strong. But is that what you need on your team? Is there much overall upside value in Brogdon? I really like him. If he goes to another team, I could see him being an 18 and 5 sort of a guy, 18, 5 and 5 sort of a player with a hit in efficiency and maybe up that steal rate a little bit. He's really, really good. Overall ceiling might be limited. The PIPM was strong. The on-off stuff was strong, plus 3.8, better than Chris Middleton. And I think that he probably can maintain himself as a top 100 guy on this squad, but again, really fueled by percentages, and they can be volatile. Although I do believe that how good this guy is as a shooter, it's not going to be as volatile as what it might be for other players. After that, it drops off a little bit. We had 6 top 100 guys, and then no one ranked between 100 and 200. Paddy Connaughton, the next highest, 216th. He surprised me this season. 21 minutes, 7 points, 4 rebounds, half a steal and a block. 47 from the field, 73 from the line. Much better than his play in Portland. I thought him going from Portland to Milwaukee was a step back in his career just in terms of playing time, but actually played more. We saw him improve his shooting. This is a guy that had been at over 50% on his twos in each of his previous 2 seasons in Portland and somehow improved up to 64% from two-point land. And that, to me, is really not going to stick. 62% on his long twos, 50% on his mid-range twos in general, 67% at the rim. Some numbers which really look like they're going to come down. He has limited overall fantasy appeal. He's a restricted free agent. Defensively, he just jumps at everything. His PIPM reflects that. He's a negative in that area. He's a negative on-off, especially defensively. I think that this season may have overvalued what Pat Connaughton can do, and I think that shooting is really, really going to drop off and cause a problem, and he may not even crack the top 250 next season. George Hill was a disaster through most of the regular season, 21 or 22 minutes a game, 7.5 points with 2.3 assists, but at times he outplayed Eric Bledsoe in the playoffs. I don't really see any team, again, I don't see him coming back on that contract that he does have $18 million with $1 million guarantee. The Bucks will want to say that $17 million. He'd be a great backup point guard for many teams, but he's never going to be a fantasy influencer or a top 50 player like he was in Indiana. Although the way he played in the playoffs makes you go, well, maybe a team could talk themselves into George Hill. Durability is a problem. Consistency is a problem. I don't think at age 33 we're expecting all those things to magically improve, but can be a solid enough backup. Timmy Frazier, he's an assist streamer when he gets the minutes. Most of his playing time was in New Orleans. Actually was the 264th ranked player overall, but he's just not good enough to maintain a regular enough role. Ersan Ilyasova, critical of that contract that he received, but he was pretty key for this team. But there were times when he was outplayed by both Nikola Mirotic and DJ Wilson. So I'm not really sure where Ilyasova goes, and I think the Bucks would be happy to try and move on from him to try and save some salary. PIPM, negative 0.89. He was negative 0.3 on-off. So a key player in the bench, played some center, played some power forward, played some 3 at times. Not really too much of a fantasy contributor. Can be a streamer for threes, hits good free throws, but overall not much of a contributor in those other categories. Let's talk Sterling Brown, 24 years of age, second round draft pick 2 years ago, second year player, 6.5 points, 0.9 threes and 3 rebounds. I thought he was going to take the Pat Connaughton role this season and play those 22, 23 minutes a game. He didn't. He showed that he was a better player than Tony Snell. I thought that he was better than Pat Connaughton for lots of the season. He's got a level of upside. He can be an efficient shooter who can pass a little bit and get some steals at times. He's still a name to watch, but he's just a little bit buried on this squad. The advanced numbers absolutely hated him though this season. Negative 3.32 PIPM and negative wins added, which on a 60-win team is pretty bloody tough to do. Negative 10 on off as well. He's really poor. So it wasn't a great season from Sterling. When he did have that opportunity to push into a more regular role, he wasn't able to take it. Now, DJ Wilson was a disaster as a rookie, really piss poor, but I thought played pretty well this season. Saw an improved role, was playing backup center and power forward, and should have been playing minutes over Ilyasova for big chunks of the season. 18 minutes, 6 and 5, half a 3, half a steal, but the shootings are concerned. 41 and 55% from the field and from the line, including 36% from 3. So actually shot not too bad from 3-point land. I thought he defended okay. He's at least a threat from the outside. Negative 1.5 PIPM is not a great number, and 3.9 on-off is also not that solid. But he did enough that if Mirotic moves on, if they look to deal Ilyasova, a larger role for DJ could be coming, and he can be that 16-team league option. Will he ever become a top 100 player? I have my doubts. Not a great rebounder, not a great defensive stat accumulator, and not a great shooter. There are a lot of things working against him, but it was obviously an impressive season from him nonetheless. It wasn't an impressive season from Tony Snell, who struggled. We know he's one of the worst fantasy producers in the NBA. Still shot 40% from 3, but offers literally nothing else. And when the minutes go from 30 down to 17, well, he's not providing value for any fantasy league. And I think that we saw guys, obviously, the nonsense of playing Snell over Brogdon was always crazy in kids' time. We saw Budenholzer correct that pretty quickly. Snell did still play the 6th most amount of minutes on this team because of how many games he played, but overall a negative in his PIPM. His on-off stuff was a negative 1.7 as well, so it just really was a step back for Snell, and he doesn't have the fantasy upside anyway. He's like a worse version of Alan Crabb. He hits threes, but if the minutes aren't there, that's all he does, and I don't really see too much changing. Gasol, he's not a fantasy factor. And the other guy, Dante DiVincenzo, who started the season out really well and then had those heel issues that ended his season. Only played 27 games, 15 minutes a game, shot horribly from 3. I didn't like the pick of him at the time at that spot. I didn't like his fantasy prospects moving forward, and nothing that really happened this season has changed too much for me for DiVincenzo. The fact that he was in the rotation at the start was a massive surprise to me, and I thought he held up okay. Maybe if Brogdon goes and Sterling Brown doesn't work out, there is going to be some opportunity there for DiVincenzo, but overall, I don't massively like his overall fantasy prospects. That'll do it for another show in the season review series, another week down as well. Make sure you're checking out our sponsors, Hotels.com and Grip 6 Belts, and the Himalaya podcast app. Subscribe to us there. Give us a 5-star rating and review there and on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, and follow me on Twitter at @RedRock_Beeble, and follow the network at Locked On NBA Net on Twitter and on Instagram. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Giannis Antetokounmpo.